So cryptocurrency, we decided to bring in a very, very special guest. As you guys have seen, Uncle James, he's been all over the show so many times to come in and talk about different things. If you don't know who Uncle James is, he is a retired Wall Street veteran, managed billions of dollars. He does Wall Street tours, take people around Wall Street. If you're in the Wall Street area, you want to learn something about Wall Street, you can hear from James. He's currently in New Jersey at the moment, at the time. Brings a lot of experience. He was around the market in 2000, 90s, 80s, even some of the 70s as well. So being around the market that long, being a fund manager that long, he's seen a lot. He's seen some crashes, some ups, some downs, and all this other good stuff. So he's the wizard that I like to check in with to see what's going on in the world and the market, because I know he has a whole lot more experience than I do. And no matter how many certificates and education and success that I have, you always need that old wizard in the background. But that's enough. That's enough of hearing from me. But James, with this, well, let me say hey to you. How are you doing, James? How you feel today?
I'm doing real good. I'm doing real good. I'm excited. Anyway, I think we want to get right into this right away.
Okay.
Bitcoin, or the cryptocurrency, I would call it a digital currency, but I put that in quotations because there really is some debate over whether it's really a currency or not. I think you want to first, before I say anything, just go back a little bit in time. Historically, maybe there's this is probably the fourth attempt to create some kind of universal currency. Traditionally, they used items like gold and silver, and they made coins out of it, and that was the value. Then they decided, probably around the early Middle Ages, around 1200. Actually, I believe it was Kublai Khan, if you can believe it or not, because the Mongolian Empire was huge, and they had to use, and it was hard to move around gold for such long distances. They said they created like an IOU, a piece of paper, and it said if you turn this piece of paper in, it's worth 50 pounds of gold, or 10 pounds of gold, or 10 ounces of gold, or whatever. So then they created paper currency with the gold backing. It was kind of like it's like it basically was an IOU, and if I had that piece of paper, I could present it and retrieve it for a certain amount of gold or silver. Around 1913, we created the Federal Reserve System, and that created a whole new idea called a fiat currency. And basically, the Federal Reserve said, "Listen, you have the United States government's willingness and ability to repay its debt." I'm making this as sort of simple as possible. The United States ability to repay its debt. So the money is the money's value, the dollar's value, is based on our belief that the U.S. government can repay its debt and wants to repay its debt. So along now we get to Bitcoin. And in recent years, particularly after the 2008 financial crisis, again, this was pushed into the forefront on the downside of fiat currency and the downside of central bank intervention in the economy. So Bitcoin was kind of created. Really, it's like an algorithm. They call it a blockchain. Just think of it as like a mathematical formula. And the blockchain basically creates the currency and logs all the transactions and records who owns which and who owns that and whatever. So it's kind of like this huge database that's decentralized, and it's created by the free market. Now, like any other currency, the big issue with Bitcoin, there's a couple of big issues. One is we all have to believe that it's of some value, because as some of my older friends will say, well, if I unplug the internet for 2 hours, what happens to my Bitcoin? It's like, you're in trouble. So it functions on the belief. It doesn't really have at least with a fiat currency, like in the U.S., you could go back and say, well, the U.S. GDP is a certain size, and the currency is based on that huge GDP and the government budget and all these things. Bitcoin doesn't have that background. However, it has the free market and everybody all over the world creating one currency in a decentralized fashion that they can trade everywhere. like in Japan, in America, all over the place. Um, the problem, one of the problems I have is, first of all, you have to believe that this thing is actually worth something. Now, the blockchain is created, it was very clever. We've talked about this before. The blockchain is kind of created. Think of a gold rush. And I find gold right here in New Jersey, right outside of New York. And in a couple of weeks, I find about $10 million worth of big nuggets that I put all in a pail, and I hide them in my house. And the word gets out, and now there's a gold rush in this area. So millions of people show up in my town here, and they start panning and digging for gold all over the place. Well, within about 3 or 4 months, people are now just finding maybe gold dust, and they're panning in the stream. So there's like this big boost at the beginning, and then it slowly starts to fall off. And the blockchain is created the same way. I believe by 2140, there'll be no new bitcoins created anymore after that. It comes to an end. Now that's very clever, and and a lot of people, one thing you don't want to confuse is you don't want to confuse the theory of a global currency with the reality of what you're dealing with. A lot of the people who are big promoters of Bitcoin, you notice they have a political bias against central governments, central banking, big bias against Wallstreet. I mean, let's face it, if Bitcoin becomes the big thing, it's really the financial sector is the prime target of this. It's it's basically gonna take it's going to take a lot of the fees out of the financial system. It's going to eliminate a lot of transaction costs in the financial system. It's going to eliminate a lot of the financial system. And by some people's standards, the financial system itself is 20% of the US GDP. So it's huge. So in some ways I buy into some of the political ideas. I'm not really a big fan of central banks. I see a lot of danger in that. However, it is what it is right now. I frankly rather be on a gold standard. That would be more my thing, because gold has a fundamental value that everybody can appreciate. I'm not sure that's the same with Bitcoin. That's a problem. The other big flaw that I see in Bitcoin, and I picked this up right away, is you get like a wallet, and everyone's wallet stores like this blockchain on it. So it's stored all over the world. Well, as Bitcoin becomes bigger and bigger, that blockchain starts to take more and more memory out of your computer. So the blockchain itself becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually it's going to get so big that you're going to need server farms to manage this, which automatically implies you're going to have more government intervention and more government getting involved in this. And it's going to turn right back into, instead of creating a global currency that's independent of politics, it's going to create a global currency that's going to be totally dependent on politics, because you're going to need huge server farms to kind of hold this blockchain. Now, some people will argue with that and say, well, technology and blah, 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 and Moore's law and all this kind of stuff. But the blockchain is just, it's gargantuan in size, how fast it's growing. So that's a fundamental structural problem with the blockchain itself. I've heard a lot of people try to address it, but I'm not really impressed with anybody's solution right now. Now, what's going on? Obviously, the thing is skyrocketing. I think right now what's scaring me for most small investors, and this is not, and I don't want any of this to sound like I'm totally negative on the idea. I'm trying to balance, like, there's things that somebody like me would say, wow, that's really cool. We have a global currency created by an unaffiliated, that's above politics. Kind of like, in some way, that's what the gold standard would be. So that's really cool. The problem is, if you try to establish that, who are you fighting? You're really fighting the man. You're right. You're fighting the whole financial sector of the entire world and all the governments that are locked into this. I mean, let's face it. Before Trump, who's the biggest contributor to presidential elections in the last the last two? I mean, Goldman Sachs, all Wall Street is basically paid for the presidency. All these big banks paid for the presidency. That's, they're big contributors to politicians. And so politicians are going to be real unhappy that you're going to kind of, you're going to get their sugar daddy. You're attacking their sugar daddy, basically. Other
So
issues I have is, go ahead.
you're saying, okay, every politician is backed by Wall Street.
Well,
And
not every, but a lot. I mean, if you look at it, like, for example, who was Obama's biggest contributors? Goldman Sachs. Who was like, I mean, I could rattle it down, but it's Goldman Sachs, right? It's like, now Trump was an entirely bizarre, is a totally out of the norm political event in the U.S. But like, I like, you're almost to the point where a lot of people, if you look back in your history, President McKinley was assassinated. McKinley is considered the first president that was kind of bought and paid for. Historically, they look and they say Rockefeller, Morgan, Carnegie basically paid, put him into office by spending tons of money and getting him elected, and he was their guy. And they basically, he worked for them is the way they were, Now in the modern day, it's not quite as concentrated as that, but it's closer than you think. And so this is for politicians. This is like, Bitcoin will be and make an end to this. We're in big trouble. It also ends the idea, for example, if a government can slowly inflate their dollars, like through inflation, you erode the value of the dollar. So if I borrow $100 today, if I pay it back in 30 years, I'm only paying back like $20, and if you adjust for inflation. So that's a scam that all modern governments use to kind of pay for things, because what do? Vote for me. I'll give you this. I'll give you a free phone. I'll give you food. You don't even have to work anymore. We'll just pay you to stay home. We'll, like you see, it's like, what am I going to get? And you, in some degree in the United States, which is pretty scary now, we have a whole sort of group of voters now who have they vote for a living instead of work for a living. And they know they can vote themselves money and vote themselves raises and vote themselves benefits and vote themselves by, pursuing certain politicians. And so how do you do this? You do it with inflation. You keep inflating and you borrow money and you inflate, and you're paying back the 20 trillion today is going to be 10 trillion 50 years from now, or 20 years from now. There'll be far less. So now Bitcoin would eliminate this. So that means we'll all have to live within our means. And the other big issue, you have a couple issues. Now, the biggest thing that scares me about Bitcoin, and you were mentioning it, this is why I went on to the show to talk about it, is the same people who were talking about real estate in 2008 are talking about buying Bitcoins now. And Facebook is littered with it. I see people that I know are bartenders, and don't get me wrong, I know a lot of smart bartenders, and they have, it's just, but if you go on Facebook, you see bartenders talking about they want to buy Bitcoin and they're interested in it and they're watching what's going on and they saw that it went way up. And there's people that I see, I mean, you see it you get up in the morning, you go to work, you do stuff. If you just watch Facebook during the day around 1:30, in the afternoon, there's a whole group of people, they just wake up at 1:30. Because they've been out all night partying and having fun, and that's when they wake up because they don't really have to work that hard during the day, and they're relaxed. And those are the people now all talking about buying Bitcoin, just like they were talking about buying real estate with $100, like in 2008. And that,
go ahead. Think about it too, like we just said about a month ago, like a couple months ago, we did a show on marijuana.
Right.
The reason why we had to do a show on marijuana because marijuana was the thing to be. It was, look how far it's grown, and right after the election, you went straight to the market up, and we had marijuana. It was the biggest thing going. Now, it seems like that same crowd has diverted into cryptocurrency.
Yeah, it's cryptocurrencies, right. Yeah, and there's a lot of the same issues, like, again, with marijuana. What did I say before? I said the problem I have is the legal situation is very uncertain, the parameters for it. I think you have the same thing. There's countries and there's people who've been arrested for making Bitcoin transactions. There's to me right now, this whole thing is created by this algorithm, and it's a very cool algorithm. I mean, the idea of it, the whole thing is brilliant, and like the idea behind it. But the practical reality is it's freely exchanged because people believe it's worth something. And like I said, if you unplug the internet for about 6 hours, we'll see how much it's really worth if that happens. And it just, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, you probably have seen the news. What was it, Ethiopia or something? They found that a lot of kids were cheating on their college exams. So the Ethiopian government, or I'm not sure if it's Ethiopia or Sudan, it was some African country, they actually turned the internet off because too many people were cheating. There was a way to cheat on their like college, so they shut the internet down for 2 weeks. And so this is not an impossible thing. So whereas if you shut the internet off and the government went broke, if I had a bar of gold, it would still be a bar of gold. It's not going anywhere. And so there's
intrinsic value of.
Yeah, it doesn't. That's the big. To me, the first thing I worried about is there is no intrinsic value with this, and then when I went on YouTube and I watched tons of videos about all these people who are for it, against it, problems with it, problems. Some are very well spoken, but a lot of them are these. Well, if we have this cryptocurrency, we're not going to have any wars, and we're not going to do this, and it's going to save the world, and everybody's going to love everybody, and all this kind of. I don't want to tell you, I'm 55 years old. I've been hearing that for 50 years. I've been waiting for everybody to love everybody. Like there's not the when the internet came out, people like me, even though I wasn't a science background, I saw right away. I was like, holy smokes, this is huge. Now, a lot of people, including the New York Times in New York, said, oh, the internet's no big deal. It's really going to be nothing. It's not going to do anything. I knew that the internet was going to lead to a fundamental transformation in the way we lived our lives. There's some other things that might be coming, like maybe 3D printing is going to lead to a fundamental transformation in the way the world works. Okay. Mm. But I can't quite see it with Bitcoin. Yeah, I can make minimal fee. I can send you money in Hawaii with Bitcoin. Well, big freaking deal. I really don't, if I was a bank or I think a lot of people are saying, well, it would get rid of the need for banks because people have their own Bitcoin wallet and the blockchain records everything. We're not going to need banks anymore. We're not going to have checking account fees. We're not going to have transaction fees. We're not going to have money wire fees. We're not going to have things like that. But those, I mean, that's all cool. But and yeah, maybe it is a fundamental transformation. But it's still predicated on the idea that we got to believe that Bitcoin is of some value. And on Wall Street, we used to always say the best investment in the world is if you take nothing and you make it worth something, it doesn't cost you anything to make nothing. So there's no overhead to have remember they were selling carbon credits because I could take this piece of carbon and I could sell it to you. And then I could trade them because I was only allowed to use, I could take carbon credits and I could use them and I might have some extra left over. And you needed more carbon credits, so I could sell you mine. Like this was taking nothing, carbon, CO2, right? Basically nothing, and we turned it into it. We made it valuable. It's the ultimate Wall Street scam. It's and that's not to say that Bitcoin is a scam, but it's okay, we took an algorithm, the blockchain, we made this really cool thing, which is it's really cool if you study it. It's like every geek's fantasy of of things. But a lot of the things what's everybody says is so great about it. I think if it goes on long enough, it's gonna create a global currency, which is gonna create perhaps a global government, and all these things to me right now seem entirely negative. I'm not a big fan of this huge centralization of power that some people feel really comfortable with. I'm not comfortable with it at all. I think it's really dangerous. And it just seems to me like I remember when I was a kid, and this is kind of to digress a little bit, but just to give you an idea, I got involved in the 70s in punk rock. And in those days, the only music you could listen to was disco. And basically, you weren't allowed to listen to anything else. That's the only thing they played on the radio. It's the only thing you heard all the time. And if you ever questioned disco, you were like, they pointed a finger at you and said, "What do you mean you don't like disco? You're not allowed not to like disco." And it was no joke. It was, people took it really. Don't let anybody kid you from that age. They thought it was really good music. Don't let anybody kid you. So when you were a punk rocker, we were almost like, we were like an enemy of the state. Like you were really out there. And so one of the things that I was like, well, if I want to wear leather pants, or if I want to have my hair, I want to do whatever I want. I want to dress any way I want. I want to like do whatever I want. I don't like the disco thing. I don't like the hairstyles. I don't like those clothes. I want to wear clothes that I like. So that was part of the whole thing. So what happened with all that? Now, if you go out and you run around in public, like you notice that like people dress really terrible. It's bad. And if you watch old movies, and even in the 70s, you see even the real, like, you see people look sharp or they looked cool. Now you go out, go shopping, go food shopping, just walk around, go to church, go anywhere. People you're like, did you sleep in that? And but it was like a side effect from that attitude that I had in the 70s. Like I said, we should wear whatever we want. And because we're individuals, and we want to show off our individualism. I'm not part of some group. I'm different than everybody else, right?
So you're saying like you're comparing the disco to punk rock to fiat currency to
right. What I'm saying is that the people who are promoting this Bitcoin as like this global free market decentralized system of creating really another fiat currency. I hate this. I know they'd be mad at me for saying that, because you got to believe it's worth something, right? Those people, the unintended consequence may be, because of the nature of the blockchain, is that they're going to create a global currency for some huge centralized bureaucracy to basically run our lives. So this whole thing may totally backfire, just like me having, point spiked hair in the 70s. Then look what I go out sometimes during the week, like I venture out of my little cocoon here, and when I'm not working and I'm not working from home, and I take a break and I wander around out in the suburbs, or I walk around, and I'm just like, and then all you got to do is watch some old movies, and you're just like, yeah, people used to be really cool looking. Now people look like, you go places and like, even if unless they're in court and they're worried they're going to go to jail, like, guys don't put suits on anymore. Guys don't wear ties. And I'm not saying you have to wear a tie to be dressed nice. Like you can dress a lot, but like we're just so dressed down and so casual. And it's just like, to me now, I'm like, the thing that I wanted to happen, to everybody be individuals, it happened to now I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong? Why are people all dressed like they're not dressed up? Like, what's wrong with people? So like, I think like it kind of backfired. Like it was an unintended consequence from the ideas that I had in my head. And I think blockchain and this digital currency may end up creating the whole exact thing that they're saying they're against right now. Now, as far as investors, because I think I think we're getting a little too.
So the person who's tuning in right now, they're like, I've heard about this. I heard about it. Should I Should I save some money? I heard about this. This Bitcoin thing. I have a little money. What should I do? Should I let it bypass?
I mean, to me, the concept is just really cool. And if it works out, it's totally awesome. What I would tell people is like, if you want to get involved, only invest money that you're admitting you're going to lose. So instead of buying those lottery tickets or betting on the horses or some other thing that you do for fun that you're really not going to make any money, but you enjoy doing it, that's the money you would use to invest in Bitcoin. Because if it works, who knows? Because I've already seen those crazy things. If you put $100 in Bitcoin in 2009, it would be worth $875 million now. And
I hate those articles.
I'm like, I've been hearing that since I'm 5 years old. I've been hearing people talk like that about all different kinds of things. You know what? Yeah. It's like that's just not how the world works. Nobody buys something and holds it through all those crazy ups and downs. Like people freak out and they panic.
It's like besting from the rearview mirror. You know, everybody when you can look back and be like, "Oh, you put this into Berkshire.
Exactly.
You put this into Coca-Cola back in when your grandma was 5 years old and did this. Look where you could have been at today." And you know, it's like we can do it all day long.
Yes,
we can do the S&P 500. You know, we can do if you just hadn't brought $200 worth of this into the index and just place it in there, you would have this much now. It's easy to look in the rearview mirror and say, "Hey, this is what I could have done, should have done, and how you could have came out." But it's very hard in the investing world looking forward to looking out of the windshield. And one day we'll look back on this interview and say, "Man, you know, look who just said done that." So
yeah, I think, you know, if people want to play, but this is more like gambling money, right? I just, the problem is like, for example, what's going to happen when Dodd-Frank gets repealed? I mean, the Republicans last week, it was huge news. Now, the media, of course, didn't cover it because they don't understand this at all, and they have no idea what's going on. But the House passed the Choice Act, which is a major effort to repeal Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank gets repealed, there's going to be a boom in financial services. There's going to be a boom in banking. There's going to be all kinds of opportunities. There's going to be a huge increase in employment. There's going to be divestitures. There's going to be breakups of banks. There's going to be all kinds of crazy stuff going on. It's going to release a lot of energy because too big to fail is going to be over with. No more bailout nation. No more bailing everybody out all the time. This is going to, now, how is that going to affect Bitcoin? That may restore the confidence right away in the financial sector. Like a lot of this is predicated that people say, well, the world's coming to an end, so this is what we're going to use when the world comes to an end. And I have bad news for you. When the world comes to an end, there's going to be no electricity and there won't be any internet. So it ain't going to help you. Yeah, like this is like I have this discussion. My brother likes to collect, like he has a solar charger for a cell phone. So if the power goes out, he can charge his phone. I'm like, if the power goes out, the cell phones don't work because they need the towers need electricity. And he's like, oh, I didn't think of that. I was like, he watches all these sci-fi movies. He's like, the world's gonna end. It's a plague. We're gonna die. It's disease. It's this. It's a war. It's like it's like he's like every day he's like the new end of the world is gonna be tomorrow. It starts tomorrow, and so he's into all this stuff, and he's not a person. He's not a person, like if you met him, in a million years, you'd never guess that he's into all this survivalist stuff. Like he has all these water filters and that clean out all the chemicals out of the water. And the filter costs like $100 to replace. And it's like, he has all this crazy stuff that he invests in. And you're like, I can't believe you're a survivalist of all the things. Like I think if he had the money, he'd build a bunker underground and be ready for it. But we had this discussion with the cell phone, and I said, well, that's great. You're going to be able to recharge your phone. But if the world comes to an end, there's going to be no electricity in the cell phone tower. I know that from 9/11. What happened in 9/11? When the buildings fell down, the cell signals went out. That was it. We had no cell service. We had no cell service for probably 2 weeks. We couldn't access our cash machines. All the cash machines went offline in New York.
Wow.
So yeah, I've been there. That's about as close to the end of the world as I'd ever want to get. I was right there. So so this is one of the problems with Bitcoin. I'm like, okay, so if the internet goes off for 2 weeks, what happens to your Bitcoin, Mr. Smart Guy? And it's like, you're like, whoa, yes, that could be a problem. Now, I don't know. The internet is very durable. One of the things was weird about 9/11 is the internet worked. It actually was working, even though the phones were off. So eventually, when you figured out the internet was still online, if you had cable access or a couple of ways to get online, I could get online from home. It worked, and so we started emailing everybody, and but the phones were out. Like 10 days or so. There was no cell service.
So you're essentially saying, hey, got a little extra money. If you want to be extra high risky with it. This would get my personal take on it. Well, when I look at the world we live in now that I was born into, My younger years, it was cash heavy. As we move on into life, I notice we're becoming less and less cash. Where checks are pretty much almost non-existent, personalized checks. From if I was to write you a check, you'd probably look at me and say, "What are you doing?" you
I
know?
haven't written a check in 7 years. I had somebody ask me for one. I had to go to the post office to get a money order. I was like, checks? Who writes checks?
Exactly. So when you look at the concept of checks are kind of going away, credit cards are becoming bigger. You're looking
Right.
at PayPal. You're looking at everything is kind of look like it's shifting to this digitalized world of, hey, who's nowadays if somebody only takes cash, they look at you like you're crazy. You haven't if you go to a food mart and you still have venues that only take cash, they only take cash, you're looking like, well, what's wrong with you? Why do you only take cash? But you can take money these days like off of a cell phone. Off a cell phone, for prime example, last week when we did our book launch, a lot of people walked in, they had credit card. But via my cell phone, you got the little, you can swipe and you can
Right, you
boom,
swipe with that, right.
right on your cell phone, not even swipe, you can punch in this credit card number and be done with the whole transaction and everything. That's what I learned over time. So when I look at this, society is looking like, hey, we're moving less and less from paper, and we look like we're moving into this digital world. So when I see something like cryptocurrency, it's like I can see that becoming a thing because of the world we're living in now. If I want to send you money now, I could boom, 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 go into
Right.
a PayPal or so many other apps now that you can boom, send money across the wire. So it's kind of like, okay, we're ushering in this place. But like you said, when I align it with marijuana, it's like, yeah, it is being legalized. It does sound good. Everybody's on board with it. But are we ready at this point to get there?
This is yes. See, what you're bringing up is the philosophy, which I think a lot of people would agree with. But what I'm telling your listeners is, don't confuse the philosophy, that whole idea that, hey, everything is going digitized, digital currency. Don't confuse that with investing in bitcoins right now. I think you got a lot of, there's like huge volatility. I'd say the risk levels are gargantuan. It doesn't mean it's not going to work out. It's just that from a risk return risk reward profile right now, the risk level on, to me, looks like it could go to zero. And so that's why I'm saying, if you want to, like, the concept is so cool. If you want to get involved, just, this is money, you play on the lottery or you bet on the horses, or this is money you're willing to lose. And if you can do that comfortably, and maybe even over time, like, a lot of people buy like 10 lottery tickets a month. So $5 a pop, that's $50. You put $50 a month into Bitcoins. Who knows in 5 years what that could, if it's, mind you, if the internet stays on and like everything works, because who knows?
And what I always tell people, my advice would be, hey, at the bottom, you have your low risk stuff. You may have your index or something like that. Then your next level, your middle level, you may have some blue chips, some good old blue chip stocks that you may watch draw you a nice little dividend. Then at the top, your high risk stuff, it will probably be something like a place like, hey, let me do a little bit of Bitcoin, or hey, let me do a little bit of marijuana.
Right.
Let me do these high price stocks, because I have, looking back over my investing career, it's sometimes that, I've jumped up, because the reason why young investors that are eager to jump into a Bitcoin or a penny stock, because they say, hey, my rate of return, I can buy more, and my rate of return is so much more higher with this than the index. We probably know the index is probably not going to double and triple by the end of the year. We could speculate. Could happen. Anything can happen. But the likelihood of the index doubling and tripling at the end of the year, me doubling my money at the end of the year, investing to the index, probably not. Or me going into buying Walmart and expecting it to double and triple by the end of the year, probably not. But the possibility of a cryptocurrency, Ethereum or Bitcoin, tripling, doubling by the end of the year is, yeah, you can do a 500% return very easy by the end of the year. So a person will be like, okay, well, I only have $500. I'm a bartender. I don't have thousands of dollars to build this nice big portfolio and have it managed and all those stuff like that. But I got $500. If I, like you said, looking at all those articles, hey, if you put $10,000 into Bitcoin 7 years ago, you would have $300 million today. You're like, wow. What if I had just put $500 into that? I have $500, and my friends told me about it 3 months ago, and they're making money. And my buddy told me about it last year; he's making money. I heard about it 3 years ago, and they made all this money. I have $500. I can jump into something that's high risk, and with that philosophy, is you will win some, but you will lose some. But when you look at your win and losses, you're going to end up losing more than you win. And while you're trying to jump into the next hot thing, that good old index is just doing this. That good old bullshit.
Yeah, now you're getting, to me, for most people, most of us are not Warren Buffett's or Bill Gates. Or we're so lucky that we buy a piece of property and we stick a shovel in the ground and oil comes out of the ground, right? Like most of us are either that like skilled or that lucky. So for most of us, it's like, think of the tortoise and the hare. And at the end of the day, the slow and steady over long periods of time, just outperforms. It does it in your career. If you just you see it all the time. You read those articles. Like, I work for UPS. He never made more than $40,000 a year. He retired with $72 million. How did he do this? Because he lived way under what he made. He put all the money away and boom. And he lived very cautious, low key lifestyle. And, so I just think for most, that's like the big picture, but on the other hand, it's such a unique, weird experience to be involved in something like Bitcoin. I think, there's plenty of your listeners out there. I'm sure they go every month to put $25 down to buy lottery tickets or something. If you took that money and put it in Bitcoin, that would be about what you're, because you might hit it. Like you said, maybe that $25, Jim Cramer said they could go to $1 million a piece. Now, this is another thing that scares me because Jim Cramer's talking about it on CNBC. So I'm like, oh no. Oh no. Oh no. And don't get me wrong, the guy knows. It's not like I don't think he's a smart guy or anything like that. And this is no dig on Jim Cramer. It's just that's so much. He's watched by a lot of inexperienced investors. People who are new to the business. He's like a name that everybody knows. He's somebody you right away are attracted to when you don't when you first start. And it's got that crazy. Like I told you the Amazon story. We bought Amazon when it first went public, right? We didn't go right in the IPO, but a little bit, it rallied up. It probably went about 47.50, trade all the way down to 17. I bought a whole bunch of it at 21. The stupid thing goes to 27, 28. It goes up. Now it's 39. This idiot goes on TV and says it's a $400 stock or a $600 stock. The thing went straight up so we were just suddenly standing on this pile of money. It was like you just won the lottery. It was like, whoa. But that doesn't, as an investor, those kind of stories are great to talk about on a show like this, and they're fun to reminisce about. But that's not going to get you rich looking for those kind of shots. What's going to get you rich over the long run is just to continually, put a regular amount of money away every year. Just kind of leave it alone, buy those index funds and forget about them. And just that's for most people, that's going to work the best. Just to create a plan and stick to it and just keep going along and don't let the ups and downs of the market or anything really
James,
affect what you're doing.
To pick up what you said, after Trump won, before Trump won, we was like, well, going into this election, we're probably going to see a big sell-off. Then we're going to see a rally later or whatnot. And then after he won, you came onto the show and you said, hey, just jump on it. Jump on the index.
I'm still 100% there. I might have a little change when I'm thinking about energy, but I think, you've had more rumblings again because there's been a little chaos going on. There's a lot of distractions in Washington. So people are taking their eye off the ball. But like I said, you passed the Choice Act yesterday. That's a key component. Getting rid of Dodd-Frank is a key component to getting the stock market to go up huge. Now, little tax reform, a little fix with Obamacare, because Obamacare is going under. It's, whatever you want to call it, the ACA, that it's done. It's going to collapse by the end of the year. It's just going to die a natural death, and then it's going to leave all these people with no insurance. So it's
I want to say that since you said that, I want to say the Dow was at like 18,000 points at that time. Now you're talking about another
But
2 to 3.
But you notice it's gone up and down. Remember what I told you in that show? I said a real bull market is like you're looking for a triple in less than 10 years. So you're not looking at triple from the low. You're looking at if we started out at 20,000, by the end of the decade, we should be at 60,000. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
You're telling me a story. You was on Wall Street because if you guys don't know, James does tours on Wall Street. You was doing a tour on Wall Street, and you was talking about the investor show. Tell me about the story.
Wait. Say that. Go.
He was like,
I want to say this is how famous you are, right? So, like last week, I had some people from Hawaii. One guy was a really good. He knew his stuff. He was like a day trader, but he was really into it. He was into Bitcoins. He's like he may not have had a vast amount of experience over a long period of time, but he seemed like he was really interested. He had done a lot of homework. He wanted to see the history. He wanted to see. And so I said, "Oh, I've been on this show, the investor show. The guy lives in Hawaii." And they looked at me and they go, "I've seen that show. I know that guy. You were on that show." They were so impressed with me that I was on your show because you're a local celebrity. Well, now you're more than that. Now you're rubbing elbows with Bill Gates. You're hanging out with Warren Buffett. You're eating steaks where Warren Buffett eats steaks. You're like, I mean, you're like a class act. You're in a whole different ballgame. Now it's like, I come on this show and I'm like humbled to be with your audience, and I like it's nice to get invited places. Like, it's a Sunday night. I had nothing to do tonight. No, it's like I like invited. I've been mulling this Bitcoin thing around in my head for like the last year, and like you kind of pushed me to really sort of formulate some kind of idea about it because we've talked about this a little bit before, and I just was like, oh God, I like this. Like this thing is. There's so many different facets to this. It's a really hard. And like I'm a guy, I like to know what my downside is. I want to know what makes something go up and what makes it go down. At least I want to think I know what it is. So when you do that, but if you're confident that you say, if this, and this happens, that the stock's going to go up, and if that happens, the stock's going to go down. You have more confidence when you own that stock. You know what's going on. So that way, if you have those bad days, like oh my God, Comey's going to testify. The market's down 100 points. Meanwhile, the whole thing was a big nothing, and the market goes right back up. Like the market hit an all-time high in the middle of his testimony because it was a big bogus. This whole thing has been BS. Like it's really a BS. It's just playing politics. And at this point, I think right now the public is starting to get more and more. There's starting to be a lot of backlash against it, I think, because people are like, well, isn't the Congress supposed to be working here? We're having continued, we're going to have more and more of these, Senate committee is going to investigate, whether, like if Bobby Fischer cheated in a chess championship and when he played the Russians. And like, I mean, it's just gotten ridiculous. And I think the people who are buying into it, like they love to hear about it, but the rest of the public is kind of not buying into it anymore. We're like sick of hearing about it because it's a big nothing. And so like people are like, well, you guys need to get to work. What about tax reform? What about Obamacare? What about Dodd-Frank? Well, Dodd-Frank, at least they did something. So they're starting to do something, and those kind of things are temporarily going to make the markets go up and down. But if you know where your head's at, you just sit there and go, well, I know, this stock or that is going up because of these reasons. None of those reasons have changed. This is just a temporary fluctuation. So you kind of ride right through it. You're more confident to hold on to stuff. But something like Bitcoin, you're like, okay, what's really going to make this go up? What's really making this go down?
Not to cut you off, but I think what's from the outside looking in, what's causing a mass majority of the rally is press.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say. I mean, you should if you get bored, go on YouTube and watch like the million Bitcoin videos. Some of them are like, this is a war on the enemy governments and globalism. These guys are like, they sound like Looney Tune. Like there used to be this guy who used to run for president all the time. I forget what his name was. He was like a real. No. Perot was a little wacky, but not in this way. But there was a guy who used to run it, and he used to run commercials in the middle of the night of like the Russians were going to nuke the U.S. and like this is like during the 70s and 80s, and he used to always run as this wild third party, and he never really got that many votes, but he was just kind of like a crazy person. And that's what some of this stuff. I watch some of these things, and they're like, there's murdering, there's killing, there's wars everywhere, we're killing everybody. I'm like, yeah, well that's bad, but like. That's kind of if you're a student of history, there's the amount of peace you've had is very it's micro. The reason it looks like there's wars more maybe now than there were 30 years ago is just because we know more about them because we have the internet now. When Pol Pot was killing everybody in Cambodia in the 70s, we didn't have the internet. Most people didn't even know where Cambodia was. They didn't even know what it was. So like it was like, now you have it on the internet in 2 seconds. If something like that started to happen, like you see all the stuff that's going on in Venezuela, unless you're not paying any attention at all, you see that Venezuela is in total chaos because this is the end result of socialism. You get socialism leads to dictatorship, which totally collapses and leads to anarchy and chaos. And that's basically what you're having in Venezuela. And now it's all over the internet. But if this was 30 or 40 years ago, nobody in New York City, even barely anybody would even know where Venezuela was. They don't even, they don't even know where Venezuela is. And it's, well, look at remember that hashtag thing? Who was the guy from Angola? He was like a terrorist in Angola. He was like kidnapping people, and they had that hashtag, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, this guy running around in Angola with a military army in the middle of the jungle there and like kidnapping people is busy looking on Facebook that people don't like him because they're putting these silly hashtag things on stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, you got to be kidding me. But what was funny about that is most people didn't even know where Angola was. They didn't even know it was in Africa. They'd never heard of it. So I just think like you got to be tempered with this. I think, like you said, it's going up because there's a lot of press. There's a lot of hype. There is some interesting, all the stuff you said about about this digital current. A lot of people buy into that. Like I have a tendency to agree with it to some degree. But the problem for me is again, what happens if you unplug the internet for 6 hours?
And that's what I learned hanging around and learning from seasoned investors like you is that you always look at the intrinsic value. Like when it's all done, when it's all said and done, when this is worth $1 million, what am I left really having? So right. Last month I was at Berkshire, and to see that Warren Buffett was in a Cadillac out of all cars, all the Bentleys and all the whatever.
Cadillac's a hot car. For the money, it's a hot car.
So he look at it like, hey, when you take all away the money, if you take away, forget about the money and the name, what do I really have? Right. When I get in this car, does it feel comfortable? Does it ride nice? Does it does this? Forget about the name. Forget about all these other bells and whistles. What does it really have when I sit inside of it? And that's the way it sounds like you're looking at Bitcoin. It's like, what is the intrinsic value?
Yeah, right. And I can't right. And so that's why I'm saying it's like a lottery ticket. If I buy a lottery ticket for $5, what's my downside? I could lose $5, right? What's my upside? I could win 440.
Look at it,
447 million.
Look at a McDonald's. Let's say if all the McDonald's went out of business,
right?
If they could do more burgers, they still have a lot of real estate.
Yep.
Those stores are still on
right. Plus, if McDonald's started to suffer because they have so many restaurants, because it's so much public information, you could start to see it happening. Like I used to own a lot of Starbucks stock, and I'll tell you when I sold it. What happened was I used to go to this Starbucks all the time in Hoboken. And it was right next to a gym that I used to go to. And it was like after 9/11, and I'd go to the gym because the gym near where I lived in New York had been It was inaccessible, let's just say. So I take the PATH train to Hoboken. I go to the gym, and then I take a shower, and I go to Starbucks and have a coffee, and then I go back to New York. So it was like the original Starbucks where they had all the couches, and it was kind of cool. And all of a sudden, one day, they renovated it. And they renovated it in a way, it looked like a au bon pain or like a Cosi, like it looked like a food, like a typical, like, not a Burger King, but it looked like, one step above like McDonald's or Burger King. Yeah, it wasn't appealing. And I said, if that's what they're doing, people like me are not going to come here anymore. Like this is uncomfortable, and it's not pleasant, and this is just like I could go to Au Bon Pain, or I could go to Cosi, or I could go to any of these other places. It's just the same. So I sold all the stock because of that. And we unloaded it I had in a lot of accounts. I got a lot of grief for it because people in the old days, if you owned Starbucks stock, they used to always send you gift cards like to all the shareholders. So if you owned some of the stock, you get like, and they were like $25 or $50. They were like decent gift cards. They weren't like $5. They were like, they were like, so people were like, if you had the stock for a while, you were used to get these gift cards, and they got really annoyed at me. I bought Apple Computer with a lot of it. We got back in Apple at the time, and it just like they did that one thing, and so for me, Starbucks fundamentally changed because I was like, the guys who are running this business don't understand the whole cool concept of Starbucks. What they did is they took this sort of speakeasy coffee lounge experience, and they mass produced it all over the place, and so it was kind of cool. And before Starbucks, there were cool places. Like Paris was always famous for having all these cool cafes. But there were some in New York. Like there's one in New York called Cafe Reggio that's been around since the 60s. I still go there. It's still my favorite place to have coffee in New York City. And I've been, and now it's 2017, right? And like I've been going there probably since the 70s. And it's that a coffee still only costs like $3, and it's like, it's like this big. It's like gigantic. And it's, but the coffee's awesome there. And so it like Starbucks kind of they changed. Well, the problem like with McDonald's, like you mentioned, you would also see that happening with McDonald's. You could see it happening with Starbucks. But with Bitcoin, what am I going to see? I'm going to see that some guy unplugs the internet for 3 hours, and I wait. And when they plug it back in, the thing says 0 because all those people suddenly realize that if the internet goes offline, we have no Bitcoin, like they don't exist. And it's funny because I'm like, it surprises me because all the videos I've watched since you talked to me, and in probably the last 3 months, I've watched a lot of videos, read tons of articles on Bitcoin. Nobody has mentioned that at all yet. Nobody has mentioned because if the whole idea is that we all accept that this thing is worth some kind of money. Well, if the internet goes offline for a while, how do I accept that this is worth some kind of money?
When you're buying the stock, like for prime example, you're buying stock in Starbucks, you can kind of see it,
right.
What it is.
I can go taste the coffee. If the coffee, or like what happened with McDonald's, they realized they did a poll, and guess what? The hamburgers tasted terrible. And that hurt them for a long time. And they forgot that, even at a McDonald's level, for the money, people expected a certain kind of taste, and they weren't meeting that criteria anymore. So they changed it a little bit. It made them taste better. Because that was like the biggest problem.
Uncle James is like, hey, what the heck are you buying?
Right.
When you buy this, what are you really buying? What am I getting in return? Is this the price that you're giving me? What is it based on? Is it based on that everybody does this? The press, because they had a little dip in the past. Now it's been on the rise again.
Oh, it's if you look back, I think it's 4 or 5 times it's made a massive sell-off. It's had massive sell-offs because it went like in the old days it was like 30 cents. It went all the way up to like $120, and then it went all the way back down to like $20, and then it went it skyrocketed up. It was like $300, and it went down to $100 again. Like it's had some really big sell-offs. So whatever the price is right now, we could go down 90%, and it could still bounce right back up again. I've been, I'm not damning the whole idea. I'm not saying it's a terrible idea. I just said that it's from what you're talking about, to figure out the intrinsic value to this is like, ooh, this is really, it's like the intrinsic value of a lottery ticket. I got to believe I'm going to win. Otherwise I wouldn't buy it. Right?
So now to wrap things up, I pretty much get that you're